Okay, well, we'll just make a start. Just a bit of housekeeping about how this is going to work. We're going to do introductions to each of the candidates. We'll get a minute to introduce themselves. Then we're going to do a sort of 15-minute job interview, which is basically tell us a bit about yourself. I'll introduce each of the candidates. We'll go through each of the candidates. Then we're going to have a section on questions relating to climate change. Now we're going to ask each of the candidates to give their policies in specific areas of climate change. And there'll be a short sort of like debate session between them, and then you can ask a question on each of the subjects. So we'll go through each of the subjects and you can ask questions. And then there'll be a section towards the end where you can have an open question to ask the candidates anything you want. So hopefully that all sounds okay. So we'll make a start. I'll introduce the candidates first. We've got Grant Costello from SNP. We've got Ross Lambie from Scottish Conservatives. We've got McGuinness from the Scottish Greens, and we've got Joani Reid from Scottish Labour. So we're going to give each of them an opportunity. We'll start off in alphabetical order, and Alison is going to time and wait when the minute is on. So we'll start off. Just Ross, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Grant.
You're much taller than I was.
You're supposed to be the one that knows what you're doing here.
So my name is Grant Costello. I'm the SNP candidate here in East Kilbride and Strathaven. I'm really proud to be standing here in East Kilbride and Strathaven. It's where I grew up. I'm probably the only candidate on the stage that can say here. I was born here, I grew up here, I went to school here, I still live and work here. And it's such an amazing part of Scotland. I'm so proud to call it my home. I really want to be East Kilbride and Strathaven's local champion. We'll all talk tonight about what our policies are and why we think our party will do ever so slightly better for you. But what I want to say is, the job of an MP is meant to be delivering for their constituents. And that's what I want to do. I want to deliver for you, I want to deliver for our towns, our villages, and this local community. So if I'm elected, that is my promise to you right now. I will put the people of East Kilbride and Strathaven first, just like the SNP will always put Scotland first. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Ross.
Thank you. My name is Ross, and I think what's good on nights like tonight is that you just get to know a little bit about the person behind the name on the election leaflet that lands on your door. I actually grew up and was born and raised in Blackwood, not far from here. The working class parents who worked hard and put myself and my brother and sister through university. Professionally, I'm an architect. At the age of 25, I started up my own business, and I also balanced that with teaching at universities for 15 years, from Westminster, Nottingham and Glasgow universities, only giving that up recently to become a local councillor in Clydesdale. And I'm also glad we're having a meeting here because I'm really keen on environmentalism. I've actually taken on some significant environmental projects myself personally, which hopefully we can talk about later.
Okay, Anne?
Okay. So thanks everyone for coming along tonight, and thanks to Climate Action Strathaven for organising this for us. So I'm the Scottish Greens candidate. I'm standing because the climate and the nature emergencies are existential threats, and no government has done enough to tackle them. The last 12 months have been the hottest on record, and the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. But the major parties don't think that these are serious issues, and we're not hearing about them in the media or on TV debates or in Hustings unless we're in the room. And this isn't the economy versus the climate. It gives an opportunity to invest in new green technologies, in green jobs, in cleaner and climate neutral and healthier ways of living, working and travelling, and to build a country that's more self-sufficient in food and energy. And the Scottish Greens will raise taxes on the super rich, investing in a green transition, and we need a just transition that takes everyone with us. In this election, the Scottish Greens are asking you to vote like your future depends on it.
That's great. Thank you, Anne. Joani?
Hi, thank you all for coming. I'm standing to be your MP because I care deeply about improving lives in our communities. We're crying out for investment, for renewal, and for politicians who really care about the challenges that people face. We have a broken economy, broken public services, and an appalling cost of living crisis, and we all deserve better than this. We desperately need change. I think everyone in this room would agree with that. But we're at a crossroads now, and the road which we take has never been more important. And a vote for Scottish Labour is a vote to send a different government to Westminster, with Scottish Labour MPs at the centre of it, delivering the change that we need. And this is an opportunity that Scotland and East Kilbride and Strathaven cannot afford to miss.
Okay, thank you. Just to point out, the microphones are not to provide amplification. There's no speakers. They're there to record the Hustings, and we're going to be putting this out on the radio and as a show a week on Saturday, so you can listen back into it then if you like. There's also a listen again feature. So that's why they put the speakers. Can I just ask you to make sure everybody's got their mobiles on silent, so that they don't have interruptions. And as I say, when we get to the section on questions, I'll let you know when you can ask questions. So we'll go into a job interview section, I've done a job interview for 10 years. We'll reverse it, we'll start with Joani. You've gone through some of it, can you tell us what your connection used to be like?
I live in the constituency, and I grew up not too far from the constituency in the south side of Glasgow. But I grew up in Glasgow, I represented wards in London, and now kind of seeking to represent East Kilbride and Strathaven. And I think that regardless of where you grew up, your identity, that it's your values, your experience and your character that really determines whether or not you'll effectively represent others. I love it here. My kids go to nursery here, and I'm delighted to be a candidate for East Kilbride and Strathaven. It's brilliant. Not least Strathaven Park is my children's favourite place in the whole world, so they love it here too.
Okay, Anne.
So what was the question again? Why?
What's your connection?
My connection. Right. So I live in Hoggan, which is just, most of you probably know it, those of you in the room. So it's just outside Strathaven. It's technically not in this constituency anymore, but we did used to be in the same constituency. But Strathaven is my local town, so this is where we do our messages, it's where the kids go to guides. Yeah, it's like the Strathaven Park, it's also my kids' favourite park. So we moved to the area about 16 years ago so that we could live in a more rural environment, so that our kids knew what nature looked like, and knew what badgers looked like, hedgehogs. I moved from the south side of Glasgow as well, it's an interesting link. And yeah, I think that's probably just about it. Yeah.
Okay. Ross?
Yeah, well, the whole constituency is comprised of two halves really. You've got the urban centre, which is East Kilbride, Newtown, and then you've got the rural area, which is Strathaven. It's quite a contrast. And then the urban centre, like as an architect, I feel like it contribute quite a lot to making sure that serves the local community and it doesn't become a feast for the developers. And then the rural element, I'm currently restoring my own small holding, and I've got livestock, and I come here and get my feed, and you know. So I know this area well, I know the rural way of life, I know the challenges we face when we want to be environmentally friendly. We're the ones that suffer from the increased costs of energy, insulating older housing stock. So I'm kind of intimately aware of that half of the constituency as well. So as a candidate, I think I can serve this quite complicated constituency.
Well, as I say, I was born in this constituency, grew up here, live here, went to school here. I was about as local as you can get in that sense, in my connection to both East Kilbride, Strathaven, but also other parts of the constituency. Because I know it's called East Kilbride and Strathaven, but it includes so many other parts: Stonehouse, Chapelton, Glassford, Thornton Hall. So it's a big constituency. It's not just the urban area of East Kilbride. You've got lots of other parts. I'm not from the south of Glasgow, so as I say, it's just this place. I'm sorry to say, but I love this little part of the country. As I say, it's one of the most amazing parts of Scotland. My friends always used to get quite annoyed when I was at university that I kept going on about East Kilbride or parts of Strathaven or all the sort of beautiful rural landscapes you can see. You don't have to go all the way up to the Highlands to see absolutely gorgeous visits, so yeah.
Okay. We've got a couple more things to go through. Joani, what experience from outside politics are you bringing to the potential role as an MP?
Do you want my CV? I might bore the whole audience, but I'm happy to go through it. So I think that I've got significant experience outside politics, but I think my values of kind of social justice has always kind of driven my career choices. So while I was at university and immediately after university, I was at Glasgow. I worked for a programme at Glasgow Caledonian University, which was about improving access, higher and further education access to the most deprived communities in the west of Scotland. So I worked on that throughout university and then afterwards. And then when I went to London, and my master's was in public policy, so I have a real, my background and my skill set is in public service and public service policy making. So my last job before I went into politics full time was head of policy at the Royal Colleges, which is Royal Colleges kind of cover the whole of the UK, working on projects like what it looks like to have a good death and palliative care, how to inform young mums around maternity decisions, stuff like that. So that's a kind of, and then after I was head of policy there, working with the NHS, that's when I went into politics full time, and then that's a whole other kind of part of my CV. So I've had significant experience in politics as well.
So I'm going to talk a wee bit about my sort of lived experience with poverty, most specifically. So I'm the youngest of 6 council house kids. My bus driver dad died when I was 4 years old. I've experienced real child poverty, and also the knock-on effect that has through later life. And I believe that those of us who have gone through those challenges have got a duty to turn around and make the road easier for those that have come behind us. 3 in 10 kids in Scotland today live in poverty. I think that the figure's even higher in East Kilbride, a little bit lower in Strathaven, no, we're lucky there. But it's a national shame that we have people flying in private jets while children are going hungry and wearing clothes that don't fit, and worrying about how their parents are going to pay the next bills. That's my experience, that's how I grew up. We've become immune to these phrases like the cost of living and choosing to heat or eat, but these are real problems that people are facing every single day. And we need a broader range of politicians with different life experiences in Westminster so that we can tackle these problems head on.
We'll move into the kind of policy bits later on, and you can your kind of personal experience that you're bringing, and we will cover all of that later.
But that's the passion that drives me.
Okay, thank you. Ross?
Yeah, I've touched on a lot of it already actually. Professional experience, my career started off actually working on charity projects. It was a church, it was my very first project as an architect. And then I swiftly moved on to schools, and then on to larger housing projects and mixed use things. So the last time I counted, my little office had developed over £1 billion worth of projects. So in terms of bringing a bit of confidence to the new town development, I think that's something that I can offer. I did mention the small holding, I won't go over that again. The other personal experiences I bring to it is my environmental projects. So my wife and I, we decided to try and become carbon neutral for life. So what we did is we planted 55,000 trees, and that's now extended up to 75,000, and it's all broadleaf native Scottish species. And that was finished just at the end of COVID, and it was a very long, arduous process with a lot of bureaucracy, which hopefully we can talk about in the policy section later, and we can get rid of some of that. And also I've touched on, you know, being a rural member of society, about trying to convert and upgrade your property and trying to take on heat pumps, and how, you know, there's a lot of challenges there, a lot of detail there that we're not really being told by some of the people selling it to us. And I think a little bit of pragmatism in that discussion will go a long way, and it'll actually bring people towards it rather than being scared away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rob.
So I probably started off, oddly enough, a little bit in politics, left it, and now I'm back. When I was younger, I was one of the leading campaigners for same-sex marriage in Scotland. I was the chair of a national organising campaign that delivered same-sex marriage. We marched down the Royal Mile, delivering, I think it was over 100,000 signatures into the Scottish Parliament. We helped write the bill that delivered same-sex marriage in Scotland, becoming the 17th country in the world to deliver that, delivering a more progressive bill than was in Westminster, and that was kind of one of my leading things when I was younger. I was only 15, 16 at the time, I think, when we did that. That was quite an exciting thing to do. And then I moved on to fight for votes at 16, and I became the national chair of the Scottish campaign to deliver votes at 16. And I helped write the motion in the Scottish Parliament, which actually, to our great surprise at the time, got the Conservative Party on board. None of us had actually expected it. Labour had signed up, the Lib Dems had signed up, the Green Party had signed up, and we were genuinely quite shocked. Obviously my party, the SNP, and government had signed up. We were quite shocked when all parties had agreed to deliver votes at 16 at the independence referendum, and then going on to local elections and the Scottish Parliament election. I then kind of fell away from politics a little bit, mostly because I went to university. I really wanted to go study paleontology at university, but my mum and dad wouldn't have it. They wouldn't let me. We discovered all the dinosaurs, according to them, which is absolutely not true. Scotland is one of the global research points for paleontology in the world, but that's neither here nor there. I went on, I was at university, graduated from Aberdeen University. Went on to become a youth worker in South Lanarkshire in East Kilbride for a while. That was something that was really passionate, a real passion project for me, working with disadvantaged children and children who wasn't sort of running football youth groups or badminton youth groups, any sports groups, which always had lots and lots of kids coming into it, but sort of the off-kilter youth groups, people who didn't necessarily feel accepted. So that was something that was really passionate for me. I was really passionate about. I then went to work in the third sector, supporting local charities all across Scotland, not just South Lanarkshire, but some in South Lanarkshire too. Mostly working on funding applications and events management, trying to make sure they could promote what they were doing, something that no doubt Climate Action Strathaven does a lot with a lot of the work you do right behind me. And then I was an author, I wrote a book, got it published, was absolutely terrified. Somebody found a spelling error on the third page and we were absolutely terrified, but thankfully there was nothing else in it. Oh, not nothing else in it, but no other spelling errors in it. And then I went to work on politics, and now I'm here.
Here we are. Okay, well thank you. Thanks to the four of you for sharing that background. I think we'll move on now to the next section where we're going to do climate change policies. Now what I want to do in this section is I'll ask each of you a question about policy, and I want each of you to answer without interruption. And then we'll have a little section where you can question each other or comment, and then we'll have questions from the audience. So we'll start off with one of the subjects that causes a lot of debate in terms of climate change is oil and gas exploration. And there's various contentions about continuing with oil and gas is not going to get us to net zero. And so it's important to try and get an understanding of what each of the policies are that each of the parties represent. So I think we'll start with Ross.
Yeah, sure. I think everyone here would love to never have to use oil and gas ever again. We'd love to. It's more just a practicality thing. If we completely close off that avenue, then during the transition period, which at the minute the estimates are, we're not quite sure how long it's going to take. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. It's very difficult to change the entire mechanisms of the economy around. And if we turn it off too quickly, we're basically importing it from other less reputable people from around the world. People from the Middle East that don't share our same values. And so that's why at the minute we just can't close it off. We can't close it off and then rush into it. That's,
yeah, I don't think that anyone will be surprised that the Greens are not going to do any more oil or gas exploration. We've committed to keeping the fields that we currently have open and using the time that they are still producing oil and gas to reduce our dependency on those limited resources. The climate scientists and the UN agree that we need to keep 60% of reserves in the ground. We can't keep drawing them out and burning them. We are going to kill our planet if we do that. And we can't just keep saying, oh, but oh, but we need to get it from here instead of getting it from other countries. We need to stop our dependency on it altogether, and we've got a bit of time to do that. The Greens aren't talking about shutting everything down tomorrow or anything. We've got the time. So the Tories have been in charge, and you had that opportunity to invest in a just transition, and it hasn't happened. I think that's
So the Scottish Government's policy is very simple. It's taking an evidence-based approach to oil and gas fields. That's something that the Supreme Court only today affirmed as something that all across the UK we should be doing. Now, we believe in a just transition. That means moving all of us together so that we're not making large sections of the economy unemployed, but we are moving towards that net zero. We have strong, big ambitions. Sometimes we won't meet those ambitions, but it's important to drive forward from where we are. We're talking about investing £500 million in a Just Transition Fund. It's time for the UK government, whoever takes on that role, be it Conservative or Labour, to match those funds so that we can deliver that just transition. Scotland, we're talking about whether or not we need to go to unfriendly countries for our oil needs. Scotland doesn't have that. In 2022, 100% of Scotland's electricity consumption needs were met through renewable energy. Scotland is a hub in Europe for offshore wind, for onshore wind, for hydrogen, for hydroelectric power. We are the renewables hub of Europe. We are one of the greatest natural resources any country in the world could possibly ask for.
We're all going to renewables
yeah.
later on in this section, but in terms of oil and gas, I think it's important to try and get an understanding of how is that going to be managed over a period of time.
As we say, take an evidence-based approach to anything. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, shut everything down now or keep everything open forever. Neither policy works, neither policy is sensible. I'm not saying any other parties here are suggesting that. What I'm just saying is that we need to take an evidence-based approach. It's what the Scottish Government has done each and every time we've approached this issue. And we're investing in a Just Transition Fund, which allows us to move there. Too often, political parties will talk about, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could get to X? We've actually set out a plan for how we get to that. The Scottish Government was planning to set out more information on our oil and gas strategy. Unfortunately, the election got called and that got shut down because of part of that. Right after the election, John Swinney will be announcing that plan, and I think we'll all look forward to seeing what's happening. Okay. But it's the evidence-based approach which is so vital.
Okay, Joani?
So I think the question was about oil and gas,
yeah.
And the Labour Party's position is very clear. We're not going to turn off the taps, but we won't be giving any new licences to oil and gas. That's because we need a just transition, which is why we're not turning off the taps immediately. And during that time, we'll be working with the sector to upskill and to invest in renewable technology, so that we can reach the new net zero without it costing too many jobs. What we want to avoid is what happened with Thatcher in the coal mines, which was closing them down really suddenly without a plan and leaving communities absolutely decimated. So that's the Labour Party's Green Prosperity Plan. It's about delivering that just transition, which is why we're not turning off the taps immediately. So it's a balance between meeting climate change targets and having that just transition for the workforce. And I was going to get yeah.
We'll get into renewables, we'll get into a whole lot of one of our climate change issues. Now, if anybody's got any questions, can you put your hand up, and our assistant here with the mic will bring it over.
Hi, it's just the grant. The Scottish Government have missed their climate targets 9 times out of the last 13 years.
As I said, we make ambitious targets, and sometimes we're going to meet them and sometimes we aren't.
You've missed them all.
Well, as you said, not all of them, but the important thing is that if you set out a plan that's not ambitious at all, it's very easy to make. We are setting out an ambitious plan to be net zero by 2040. Ideally, we have a stretch goal of 2035. That is our aim, that is our goal. and we want to take the country with us. That's what the just transition is all about. It's about finding ways to make sure that as a society we move towards that greener, fairer future together, not leaving any of our communities behind. And I'll never shy away from the Scottish Government making bold, ambitious plans. Sometimes we won't
Just
make
makes
it.
me think how you're going to get there if you keep missing your targets.
If you only make targets that you absolutely know 100% you can make, then you're never going to push yourself to do anything. These are about pushing ourselves as far and as fast as we can. No, we are. We're pushing ourselves as far and as fast as we can. And that is why Scotland has some of the best green energy around. That is why we are becoming a hub for Europe. It's why Scotland is being looked at all across the world for its innovative plans for the green economy. It's why so much success is being made when the Labour Party talk about GB energy. What they really mean is Scotland's energy for the rest of Great Britain. That's what we're talking about. That's the success of being an ambitious government, of being an ambitious nation. And sometimes we'll fall short, and that's okay. You get back up, you dust yourself off, and you try again. That's what everybody's taught when you're growing up, and that's what governments with ambition and drive do.
Okay. Does any in the rest of the panel want to comment on that?
Yeah, I really don't think that we want a government with ambition and drive. We want a government that actually delivers practical solutions to the problems that people face. People just want competence. They don't want high-flying ambition. And I think there's what the sense that I get is people are fed up with headlines and targets and a lack of really well thought through, deliverable, practical solutions. And I wanted to go back to something that Karen said. It's a genuine question. What is the criteria around oil and gas extractions? You talked about an evidence-based approach. What's the criteria for that evidence-based approach? Because the evidence is pretty clear about oil and gas extraction. So I'm genuinely confused.
When we're talking about an evidence-based approach, what it means is understanding whenever you decide to enact a new licence or choose not to enact a licence, it's understanding the carbon and net zero impact that you're making. That's what an evidence-based approach is. The problem what we have is too often it's either let's do X or let's do Y because it fits into a wider narrative. Again, this is what we're talking about when we're saying about having ambitious plans. When you talk about delivery, the only thing the Labour Party is talking about in this particular area is costing the northeast of Scotland 100,000 jobs with a fake windfall tax, effectively, that's going to do absolutely nothing for a just transition. It's not going to do anything for moving us forward in a positive green economy. That's the problem with having deliverables, as you want to call it. I do want a government that's got ambition and drive and wants us to be the best we can be.
Can I just pick up a couple of points? So one was the target one's quite interesting because I read in the news a couple of days ago when they missed the latest target, they've actually taken away all their targets and they're only going to have one now moving forward. It's just reminding me a bit about the education when they withdrew from PISA. And then the other one was the 100% of renewable energy coming from 100% of our energy requirements coming from renewables. I remember that being debunked in Parliament. I had to apologise for it.
We will move on to the renewables. So was that another question there? Ian?
Yeah. Joani mentioned Scotland being at a crossroads. Scotland was at a crossroads in the 1970s when oil was discovered. Under a Labour government, the exploration started with Tony Benn, one of the most left-wing members of the Labour Party, the responsible minister. Looking back over that period now, what has Scotland got out of all of that oil exploration and development in the Scottish continental shelf? We are sharing a £2 trillion debt in the UK, and across the North Sea, independent Norway has got the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, and they extracted less oil out of their continental shelf than come out of the Scottish continental shelf. So Labour and Conservative have been in charge of Scotland over that period. Can you explain what happened to that money that could have funded a just transition?
I'll go quick first. Just the wealth centres of the UK moves around a lot, doesn't it? You know, if you think back in time, it was the sort of the Midlands was a huge manufacturing base and actually was the net exporter of wealth around the UK. Then it's kind of gone to London, and London, if you look at where the money moves around in the UK, the money all pulsates out of London, heads across the whole of the UK. And you're right, you know, Scotland's played a good that's true. Well, it's true if you look at the economics of the UK. Pretty much every portion, every area of the UK takes money from the wealth produced down London.
They shut down our industries and they extracted oil wealth from Scotland. Seriously?
Yeah,
the money comes out of London.
Oil's obviously a key part of the economy.
So what happened to it?
It's by no means the biggest.
I think it's difficult for us to get into that tonight because that's not the. I accept completely what you're saying because Norway had an oil fund set up at the outset, and that money has then been used to manage a whole lot of things in the economy that we took the decision not to. But I think it's important where we are now.
Excuse me, Scotland took no decision not to.
No.
London took the decision not to under the Labour Party.
I know.
Very clearly took the decision while Labour were in government to use the oil wealth to build the M25 and to support the development of London as a global centre. That's why we are now all extracting money from London, because they drew it all in and destroyed industries across the UK. Unless somebody on behalf of the Labour Party is going to contradict that and say that the Tories didn't destroy that industry, then that's the benefit that we got from Scottish oil and London government. They even flogged off Brit oil, which they could have used to do exactly what the Norwegians did.
But I think we're not going to get into the argument tonight about should we have done what Norway did, because what we're looking at now is this election and what can happen after this election.
That's the crossroads that Joani referred to.
Yeah,
perhaps Joani would like to comment.
I take the point completely, and it's an important point to cover, but we want to get into where we are now and what the policies are for.
Well, that's the point. It's a crossroad. We are at a crossroads.
That's why we're asking the candidates what they're going to do.
But Joani hasn't commented on that crossroads.
No, but we're looking at where we are now as opposed to where we are.
I wasn't even born then.
And we're 35
The party was.
in the last
The Labour Party.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about that tonight. We're here to talk about this election and policies and the parties.
Yeah, just a general comment and question to the panel to think about. At any one time, and you can all look at it on your mobile phones, you can have a look and you can see how it pans out. The energy demand in the UK is met by fossil fuels and by nuclear, about 50% of it. About 30 to 35 fossil fuels and about 15% nuclear. So that's so we've all been talking about the supply side of that, you know, the oil and gas. Maybe we should be thinking perhaps about what the demand side is, you know, like producing. We talked earlier, Ross, about fuel plants and such like, and the installation of homes, and that's an area I think that we should be addressing, and maybe the panel will be able to.
Well, we will be going into that. That's one of the. We've got three areas.
I'm ahead of myself, am
just like the gentleman that it's a perfectly valid point. We will be in one of the areas we're moving on to soon is net zero and how we get to that, how we manage that through homes and other parts. If we're finished, does anybody got anything else I want to say about oil and gas exploration? Okay, well, we'll move on to that very subject. So thank you for bringing it up. One of the important areas about managing climate change is the whole get to net zero. The oil and gas is one aspect of it. You know, that's an important part of the transition. They've all mentioned just transition, but looking at net zero, what are your policies on phasing out diesel and petrol cars, phasing out gas boilers, looking at managing a more efficient and effective home to enable people to install things like heat pumps? So what are the policies that you're going to bring forward that will bring net zero, not just for the economy and for the country, but for individual households? then start with Ross.
Yeah, sure. One of the key concerns I've got is that a lot of the burden of this has been placed on us, the citizens, the homeowners, the drivers. The pressure's been put on us to change the way we're behaving. But there are other low-hanging fruit that in Scotland so far we're not grasping. I'll give you a quick example. So our farming industry is pretty much simulating it's still in the EU. That's the way they've done. They've just kept the same policies from the EU running. Whereas the rest of the UK, they've taken quite an innovative approach. So every farm, for example, is going to have 2 or 3 fields in which don't really make good crops. They tend to fail, they have a disease, they get waterlogged, bogged down. And what they've done in England is they've said, look, we're going to stop giving you the subsidy to keep growing rubbish crops in those fields and stop paying the money to fertilise it, to spray it with pesticides. What we're going to do is we're going to pay you that same money, but we're going to ask you to rewild it and plant it with trees. And that's what they're doing in England. They've been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. And unfortunately up here in Scotland, that's not happening because we're holding ourselves in a holding pattern to re-enter the EU. So that would make a dramatic change to our climate change targets.
But looking at important factors like how people manage homes, like we've got a retrofit programme which is aimed at improving the insulation in houses built in the 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
You know, that's a programme that Climate Action Strathaven is doing on its own initiative. But for example, the Westminster government made changes to get rid of the gas boilers. It made changes to the date for phasing out petrol and diesel cars.
Yeah.
So how
that kind of goes back to what I was saying. We felt it was just too much putting the pressure on the people. So it's coming out of your pocket. You're the ones who are having to pay to upgrade your home to replace your boiler. I've got a ground source heat pump and it costs £7,000. And then all the other stuff, the stuff in the field, the tanks, we're talking about £12,000. And I've got the biggest one you can get, and it can only produce 17 kilowatts of heat, which if you've got a sandstone house of more than 2 bedrooms, you're going to do the job. I know this. And every house only has a limited power supply coming into it. Every house has up to 100 amps. So that I can, for example, keep my house and charge an electric car at the same time. There just isn't enough juice coming from the grid. So there's too much being put on to us, because like I've gone as far as I can, and I still can't quite be fully electric.
What is the policy? I mean, if you're looking at net zero 2050,
yeah.
What's your party's policies in terms of looking at helping people to phase out gas boilers, to help with insulation, and to phase out diesel and petrol cars?
Yeah. So that's kind of the next point I was getting to is, so where the focus needs to be actually is like the gentleman said, is on the grid. So you kind of need to get the grid into as much renewable as possible. And the key thing I think is that the cost of electricity has to be cheaper. Like my heat pump costs more to run than a gas boiler or an oil boiler. That has to be the other way around. I'm going to the extreme expense of buying it. I would expect it to run more efficiently cheaper. And it's the same with the cars. Electric cars, unfortunately, are extremely expensive to buy. You know, like a third, 50% more expensive than a diesel car. And then you need to get a charging thing at your house. And quite often when you're travelling on the motorway, it doesn't work out cheaper. So we've been putting a lot of pressure on the people. And the change now is to go down the grid, and we need to try and decarbonise the grid.
The supply is supposed to go on.
Yeah.
Okay, Joani?
So, Ross, your party has been in power for 14 years, and we're still talking about what piecemeal bits of home improvement you can do to help the environment. It's simply not good enough, and it's not good enough what the SNP government have done either. We need to have, if we're seriously going to get to, rather than just having some kind of like magical target that we might or might not meet, if we are serious about climate change, it has to be at the absolute heart of government, fundamental, strategic, and it has to go through everything that you do. And that's why the Labour Party's plan for economic growth and our green prosperity plan are one of the same thing. This is just not good enough, this piecemeal change. So our green prosperity plan is our plan for growth, and it includes a whole number of policy areas, including our home insulation, our home improvement plan, which is going to help about, I think it's 10 million homes across the UK, and it will be targeted at the most environment. I think it's EPC C and under. So it's going to target the dampest and the coldest homes, but it's got to be cross-cutting. It's got to be at the centre and the heart of government. It can't be just add-on things that you think about as a second thought, which that's what it sounds like a government that's been in power for 14 years. What's our policy? We've got our home improvement policy, which is a home improvement plan, which is going to upgrade millions of homes across the UK using grants and using private investment as well. And it's going to start off by targeting the coldest and the most environmentally unfriendly leaky homes, both for health reasons and for economic reasons as well. But that's just one part of the green prosperity plan. We've got the GB Energy, the National Wealth Fund, we've got the home improvement plan, we've got the local plan, which is going to help communities like this. But it has to be at the heart of what you're trying to achieve. It has to cross-cut the whole of government, not just be an add-on.
Okay.
I think the problem with that line of argument, that it can't be an add-on, was that Labour did have an interesting plan when they were talking about 26 or 28 billion pound green energy, Green New Deal. They might not have agreed with everything that was in it, but I thought it was interesting. I thought it was a serious policy document that we could have as a basis for discussion. They cut it to the bone.
What happened to your green energy company, nationalised green energy company that Nicola Sturgeon announced in 2017 and in 2021? Can you give us an update on that? Because you are in government.
Yeah, we are in government. Unfortunately, you had the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused some problems. But not
Was it not Westminster?
But not only that, we started making major investments in other areas.
You sold off our offshore wind. You sold off our offshore wind to Shell and to BP. And even you look at all the wind, what do you call them, wind turbines all around here. Do you know how many were manufactured in this country? 0. That's because we don't have an industrial plan that helps with net zero in this country. We just have, as Grant admitted, we just have targets that we can strive to, and we don't need them, we won't need them.
Can we go back to the SNP policy?
What we're talking about, what the UK government needs to do is, when it comes directly to individuals, we want to follow the example that exists in France. We need the UK government to set up a new low income car leasing fund, which will allow us to give 50,000 leases a year to low income families. So that's directly impacting on people. In East Kilbride, we have a hub of sustainable growth. So we have the expansion of electric car charging points. That's being expanded to other parts of South Lanarkshire. So that's an important part, and that's coming as a direct action from the Scottish Government. And again, when we talk about not having plans and not having ideas and not having ambitions, ambitions are a good thing. We shouldn't laugh at it. And I know Joani wants to pretend as though that was some kind of mistake, but it wasn't. Ambitions are a great thing. The problem is the Labour Party have no ambition whatsoever. They're cutting every single plan they have and backing up. The Scottish Government are talking about a £500 million Just Transition Fund to move us to net zero. We're talking about investing in homes. We're talking about investing in people to move towards electric vehicles. We're talking about phasing out, get the exact wording of it, we're talking about phasing out non-zero emission buses by 2025. We're actually taking action on our ambitions. The only action the Labour Party is taking on its ambitions is to scale it back. Okay.
Is that like your ambition for the
Sorry, we'll take questions in a minute.
No, I'm just calling them out.
You won't be surprised again that the Green Party has what are the different ways that we aim to bring down carbon emissions from investing 28 billion in renewable projects and home retrofitting and battery storage so that we can hold, because well, our figures show that we've produced 114% of what we used in Scotland by renewable energy, but the problem is that we can't hold it. We're not very good at that part of it, so we do need to invest in that battery storage as well. Greens are also committing to banning short-haul flights.
Sorry, that's not.
But this is part of bringing us down to a net zero.
Yeah, I'm keen to try and get on to what the policies are in terms of helping households to manage it.
Okay, so we've got investing 28 billion in a UK-wide scheme to help households retrofit insulation and invest in renewable technology.
Any questions?
So you're talking about renewables and stuff like that, but what about the grid? How about investing in the grid and solidifying that? Because at the moment, if it goes down, we're all snookered. And we're not talking it's going to be out for 24 hours, it's going to be out for weeks.
You're going to melt it.
So how you're talking about bringing all this renewable stuff, which is fantastic, but where the hell is it going to go? Because if the grid goes down, you're talking millions of people are going to be without electricity, businesses will go down, and then how do you overcome that? Now, you mentioned COVID earlier. COVID's got nothing against the grid going down. I swear to God, it's like, you know what I mean? If the grid goes down, I don't want to swear, but
You are absolutely right. The national grid is...
So that's where the money should be going.
It's one of the scary things. You know, there was that famous BBC documentary that showed that the national grid freaks out every single time EastEnders come on. EastEnders finishes because everyone gets on the kit. Like, the national grid is not necessarily fit for purpose. But you actually can see that when it comes to Scotland's energy. In Scotland, you need to pay excessive amounts of money to put into the national grid. Scotland is disadvantaged by the UK's national grid system. The Highlands, if you have an energy company in the Highlands and you're feeding into the national grid, you are paying 10 times more than you have any energy companies paying into the grid in the Midlands. Like, this is the problem with the national grid. It's the problem, I know some people maybe want to say it, but it's the problem with the Westminster system. The national grid is not built in any way for the future, and it's not built for Scotland's vision for the future when we are talking about moving away from fossil fuels and implementing major change with renewable energy. It is a complete disaster, and the problem is every single UK government bypasses that. Like I say, the ambitions of every UK government, be they red, blue, or blue and yellow, is just to, we'll deal with it in the future. Okay. It hasn't happened yet, don't worry about it.
Thank you. You've got questions?
Yeah,
your
I'm just wondering if any of you have any ambitions on different types of energy other than electricity, because we do, you know, like concentrate so much on the so what about hydrogen for vehicles? Because there's so we can't cope with more vehicles, more electric vehicles. We don't have the infrastructure. So is there anything, you know, in the pipeline, or is it?
So I feel that I've not done the Labour Party's Green Prosperity Plan justice. All of that is in there, and we've had a long time to build up our EV infrastructure and our battery capacity as well. When we were talking about the grid, all of it is in there. So please do have a look at it, and because all of this is addressed. It's a really well thought through plan, that's been in development for a couple of years, but I'm conscious that I don't want to go through every single point of it and put everyone to tears. But it is in there, the infrastructure around EV, and it's shameful that we've had investment into EV chargers and absolutely none around the infrastructure, but none of it's thought through, none of it is strategic, none of it's responsible. So it's there. Please have a look at it.
Well, just when we're talking about other forms of energy, you're absolutely right. Scotland's hydrogen export potential is huge. And again, part of the problem is Brexit, believe it or not, something that the Tories implemented and the Labour Party has at the reverse, because it makes it harder for us to export our goods into an EU market. But Scotland's hydrogen potential is still fantastic. And the other thing that Scotland's got going for it is carbon capture and storage. The problem is the funds are controlled by Westminster, and each Westminster government has flirted with the idea of funding it and then pulled out, and then flirted with the idea of funding it and then pulled out. The Labour Party flirted with the idea of funding it, then pulled out, then flirted again. What we need is a UK government that's actually going to implement a real plan for carbon capture and storage at ACOR. And that's why we need SNP MPs and a strong group of SNP MPs down in Westminster. Because the only way that Westminster ever listens to Scotland is when we have strong voices. The Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats have proven time after time after time they're not strong voices for Scotland.
Can I comment on a couple of points there? Because I've missed a couple of opportunities there. So for National Grid-wise, they came to bring that back into public ownership, because it's privatised, and we would invest in making sure that it was capable of dealing with the micro-generation that we need. Because when the National Grid was built initially, it was built based on the idea that we were going to have very large producers of energy distributing to lots of small users of energy. And what we kind of need to change that around now, because we've got small producers of energy like your wind turbines and stuff, delivering again to small users of energy. So the National Grid kind of needs to be thought around those lines. With the hydrogen cars, problem with hydrogen, I believe, this isn't a manifesto, this is just from what I know, is that we need to use electricity to make the hydrogen. So unfortunately, you're going to get less energy back out of that hydrogen again, so trying to cut out that middleman. There's obviously uses for hydrogen sometimes, but electricity for
too much focus on electricity, then we do need to find other.
Yeah, maybe there's options for different technologies there. But what the Greens are talking about is investing a lot more in public transport as well, in more train lines, in more services on those train lines, in more buses. In areas like this, yeah, car charging, and in rural areas where we need our cars to get around. But anywhere where there's a hub of people, a large population, we need to get people out of their cars as much as possible and get people walking and cycling and on public transport and on trains that work and buses that go places that people want to go.
Ross, you want to?
Just a quick one on hydrogen. I used to be a big fan of hydrogen cars. I thought, it'd be great because you basically keep the petrol stations, you fill them with hydrogen, so all those people are still employed. The garages are all the same, the mechanics is the same engine, just a different type of fuel. So it seemed like a real hand in glove moment, and maybe it still is. If you go over to sort of Japan, they've gone down the hydrogen route heavily, so they don't believe in the battery power because of the lithium you have to mine, and it's quite a toxic industry. Yeah.
Lithium fires are quite spectacular.
Okay, I think you had a...
Sure, petrol fires.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty much been addressed by the candidates. It was about the upstream infrastructure of the national grid. Yeah, great that we would all be using more electricity that is coming from cleaner sources, but the electricity grid therefore becomes a transmission for that cleaner energy. I think we've addressed it all, that grid's going to have to be upgraded and modernised to be able to meet that demand.
I think a big problem with that is because it's in private ownership just now, and they're not wanting to invest in upgrading it. Of course, they want to take the profit.
But like the water companies.
Just
Except from in Scotland,
No,
which are still
Scotland,
publicly
yeah.
owned. Thanks to evolution.
Just add a bit of spice to the meeting tonight now. I was wondering what the panel's views are on nuclear. Just because we don't talk about it often enough, nuclear,
Yeah, well, it's 50% of our input at this exact moment in time.
I know it could be more,
But how do you address the decommissioning problem? Because if you look at Dunray and the absolute decommissioning,
Yeah, I know. And Dunray was, like, we're talking a 50-year-old building. So that always comes up, the waste issue, and it's terrible. How do we deal with it? But modern, contemporary nuclear plants around the world, of which there's thousands, they deal with it quite well. You know, if you've got nuclear waste, if you store it for 30 years, it's 1/1000th of the danger after 30 years. So there actually are trying to test ways of dealing with it.
Has anybody got any questions? There's one in the back and then there's one down next.
So we're thinking about microgeneration. What policies are going to go ahead that are going to change from now? Having gone through getting solar panels, heat pump, electric car, I've managed to do all that, which is great. But as I was doing it all, everything's been reduced. So the loans are disappearing, the 0% loans are disappearing, the grants are disappearing as well. So things are getting pulled back. How do we help that? Because I think that helps the grid as well, because I'm not pulling as much from the grid anywhere near as much, and in fact I'm exporting. That's the main thing now, is exporting electricity. You're helping the grid, you're using all your own electricity, and anything excess is helping everybody else be greener as well. But that's getting harder and harder to do. I was lucky I got in at the end, but now it's gone. So what are the plans to help people with that?
That was something I was going to ask, because I think Ross had mentioned that climate change, the net zero targets are putting the onus on individuals and households. And if you push the target back, as happened with diesel and petrol cars and gas boilers, you're still going to have to address that at some point. So if we're ever going to get to the net zero target in 2050, how are governments going to actually help households meet that? There's a lot to address it at some point.
Yeah, obviously, we've come through COVID, and the war in Ukraine's caused all our prices to go crazy, and it's just, I don't think now is the time for the people to carry the burden as much.
But what I'm saying is, how can governments at any point actually help people to get it? Because households aren't in a position to be able to say, right, we're all going to get pumps, we're all going to get solar panels, we're all going to do our insulation. Because an effective and efficient house is essential before you can any of the rest. So what policies are the parties proposing to take into this election for the next 5 years to help us get to the point where households are able to afford to do these things?
Well, just as Ross was saying, move the targets back. By moving the targets back, they're scaling back the funding. And that's part of the problem, which is why a lot of these loans and schemes start to disappear. Because when the UK government turns off the taps, then it becomes a major problem for getting fundings down through the Scottish Government, and in complete fairness here, to local councils, which is in St Andrews like run. In complete fairness there, that's the direction of the problem. So what we need to do is, and what I hope the Labour Party will do, is upscale their ambition, because part of the problem with this massive cut in their green energy plans has been that a lot of these funds, a lot of these loans, a lot of these schemes won't get any more funding. They're not bringing the targets forward. What they're doing is they're either pushing them back, keeping them the same, or scaling down the ambitions for what they were initially meant to be. So if the UK government can end its austerity obsession under a Labour government, fair enough. If they can start investing properly, at least that money will flow from the Scottish Government to the councils, and then we can start expanding in households. Because one of the problems is that with each person that adds to the grid and adds to these schemes, you get more demand for it, which is great. But the more demand you have, the more requirements you have, the more money you need, so on and so forth. It spirals. We need to get upscale as many people as possible so this becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But the only way to do that, again, isn't to implement a massive austerity agenda and reduce your ambitions, which unfortunately all of the UK parties seem to be obsessed with doing.
Joani, do you want to?
We've not. The Labour Party hasn't scaled back any of its ambitions. Our targets remain the same. Our programme of work remains
Did you cut
the same.
your
We have
£26 billion green energy by 20 billion?
We have cut it. Yeah, we're hoping.
So that's a scale back.
A lot more money will have to come also from the private sector, and we've been working with them to develop a plan where we'll work in tandem. This problem is far too big for it to be only the public sector. We've got to work with the private sector. We've got to work with industry, and that's what our plan does address. Yeah, we did scale it back. We do believe that we can deliver our objectives through the slightly smaller spending envelope.
Slightly smaller, £20 billion
but
smaller.
you know, we know what happened with the economy, what happened with interest rates, so we simply don't want to promise something that we can't deliver, which is huge amounts of public money. So we just have to work harder and with the private sector, but our ambitions and our targets remain the same.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll tell me that I'm going off topic again, but the 5 richest families in Scotland have the same amount of wealth as, sorry, not Scotland, the UK, have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 12.5 million families. The Scottish Greens intend to implement a wealth tax so that those super rich share some of their wealth with the rest of us. We're the ones that we got it off of in the first place, right? Put that back down to people. We will invest 28 billion in this new Green Deal, and we will invest more money in all renewable energy, in more transport, in the national grid. No, but we need to tax somebody. We need the money. We can't pretend that we can get through this without public spending, and that money has to come from somebody.
There was a question there, and then you were back after that.
Just wondering why none of the parties are actually considering repealing the laws of physics. Because so far all I've heard tonight is a complete denial of certain scientific truths. So could you maybe comment on that, please?
Which one?
Well, you don't get energy from nothing. As an engineer, a fellow engineer said at another conference, I said, you don't get something for nothing. And that's true that all this talk about green energy, you don't have to do any green energy. That's indoors, environmentally. We seem to be applying a lot of critical thinking here. If we just continue, talking about just transitions, green transitions, such like, that's not going to happen. So unless we start being a bit more realistic about either our future or lack of future, then this is a pointless exercise talking about hydrogen, lithium, whatever else. A lot requires energy to extract, to refine, so on and so forth. So
yeah, I think you're right. Hopefully I've been fairly pragmatic in how I talk about things, and that, like I've said, we acknowledge the fact that oil and gas has to carry on, unfortunately, for the time being, until we're in a position. And I also think that nuclear should be a larger part of our energy mix. And that drew some of the original nuclear power plants.
How much uranium's actually left in it? Uranium's running out. That's why a lot of companies are now withdrawn from uranium.
Look, there's a global race on renewable energy technologies, and at the moment the UK and Scotland are not in that race. If we invest and work with the private sector to put money into new technologies, then we'll be part of that race, and it will help grow the economy. We are moving away from oil and gas. We're moving toward renewable technology, and we either invest in the skills and the manufacturing behind that so that we benefit from it, or we don't, and that's the reality of where we are.
No, it's not the reality. I see. I'd love to see your evidence that we're using less oil. Oil consumption has went up and continues to go up.
I didn't see that.
Okay, I think we move on to Theo.
Just to go back to Grant, you were talking about developing infrastructure in the community and stuff like that. So I became an EV driver 3 years ago, and I used the grid because the grid was free.
Yeah.
Then it came to a point where they started charging. Happy days, it was 27p for a 20 kilowatt charge. It's now jumped up to 40 pence. Now I understand when it went up and they started getting charged, we were getting punished with our electricity. As a business owner, mine was £1.13, something stupid a unit. How the hell I survived, I still don't know. But now it's down to 25p. So why the hell have your charging points that are everywhere haven't come down in price to reflect that? To put a charger in my house, I can't really do it because of where my unit's situated, and the back of the house we're talking like 800 metres, not quite, but something like that. So point is, what are you guys doing about dropping that price since it's a government-owned entity?
No, you're absolutely right.
So the user, like me, can continue to drive an EV car and not, as you said, you're paying more money to drive your car on the motorway than you would if you were putting petrol in it. So it's a conflict of interest here.
No, you're absolutely right, and this is what we're talking about scale when we're talking about upscaling. The prices reduce when you upscale, when you expand the network. The network has to be expanded, but it also comes down to when we're talking about the national grid, as you were talking about, how it's not fit for purpose for the modern age. I know the gentleman here was talking about oils being used more, but in Scotland we are going in a different direction. We are expanding, but our infrastructure is not ready for it, and we need to massively upscale that. And to be frank, parties of all stripes and all colours have been talking about this a while. The Scottish Government has actually taken action. Now, Labour are going to come into government this time. There's no doubt about that. Thank goodness the Tories are going to be gone, because all they have done is, to quote David Cameron, scrap the green crap. Well, it's the Labour Party's job now to show that they're not going to act the same. Unfortunately, they seem to be following a Cameronite policy on that one. But if they're willing to work with the Scottish Government, they can genuinely upscale this to a massive scale. This is the ambitions that we're talking about, because you should not be suffering because you are going in the direction that the governments are encouraging you to.
But the irony is, I can go to Hamilton and charge my car faster at a 300 kilowatt spot for exactly the same exactly the same price, and that's private enterprise. Yet the government ones, like whatever it is, it's like rubbish.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're still paying 70p. So
I don't know the exact numbers as you're saying. That's what I'm saying. It is all about the mission to upscale. The more we upscale, the faster and the quicker we reduce the prices, and that's what happens when you cut down ambition. When you cut down ambition, you get into a mire. You get into, oh, we'll deal with that problem later, which is what, to effect, Ross said when we were talking about nuclear energy, oh, we'll deal with the problem of the waste later. We're not interested in dealing with the problems later, we're interested in dealing with the problems now.
I can tell you now that
we need to move on from this section. Climate change was an important part of this conversation. I think before you all said we recognise the need to do so. In some ways it's kind of unfortunate for us to work together to achieve what's being done, but we're in a competitive election process, so we'll let them see where it goes to. We'll move on to a section now where everybody is going to ask questions on any sort of thing. So has anybody got any questions that you want to take?
Can I ask the panel, each and every one of you, what is a woman and what is the difference between sex and gender? Define what a woman is.
Yeah. No, well, Ross, I'll go for it because it's a serious question, isn't it?
It is very serious.
The thing about it is, it affects a minority of people, but that minority affects them greatly, isn't it? So I think we all always need to be very careful how we talk about this because it can affect some people very deeply. So just there's a danger of it becoming an argument about language. It's a bit like, do you remember the David Cameron brought forward the gay marriage proposal and it went through law and had the similar debates, and it kind of ended up boiling down to an argument about the definition of the word marriage and whether that's a religious word or can be used by anybody. So it kind of got distracted into the bits and bobs. Like I'm open for persuasion. Currently I believe that sex is biological because that's kind of how it's defined in science. We believe in science. Gender is open for discussion, and some people do go through a very long process of changing gender, and I do support that. I think as a country we're very forgiving, we're very generous, and we're very open-minded and welcoming. I think we just need to go through a very incremental, polite and serious discussion about how can we accommodate minorities in society, whether it's gender or
I think the question I really want to ask is how do we protect female rights?
Yeah, exactly.
Female.
Yeah. So that's core in the discussion, yeah.
Okay.
But it is a
Okay,
discussion
sorry,
that we have to have.
Can we move on to the asking the candidates to answer? Joani?
Yeah, it's something. I mean, I feel quite strongly about it that we need to have a very clear distinction between sex and gender. I mean, primarily because, well, lots of reasons, but when I was a senior counsellor in London, I was in charge of domestic abuse shelters, and I think that it's really important that we protect single-sex spaces and to protect vulnerable women and have those safeguards in place. So I do see a very clear distinction between sex and gender, and I'm really happy that the Labour Party manifesto makes that distinction and has set out its intention to protect women's single-sex spaces and to implement the cash review, which is another thing that's quite concerning.
I think the world is a really complicated place. When I was campaigning for same-sex marriage, I had multiple conversations all over the place with people who had a variety of different views, as Ross said, as to what the definition of marriage is. But in the end, we want to unite people, not divide people, and sometimes this particular debate can get really nasty and can make people feel small, can make people feel worried, can make people feel alone. And so if we do need to protect same-sex spaces for women, that's absolutely true. And there are laws in place to do that. And if they do need to be enhanced, then we need to enhance them. We also need to protect a very vulnerable, very, very small minority of people who are trans. And both of these things can be achieved. But what can't be achieved is if we're both at loggerheads. You know, it's easy to fall into two different camps. The truth of the matter is we all just want to be safe, we all just want to be protected, and we all just want to feel like we're seen. And so that's important, and I understand where the passion comes. I really, really do.
Yeah, I think just echoing what the rest of the panel have said, really, that protection of single-sex spaces is enshrined already in our equalities legislation, and whatever we go through with the gender recognition reform, or which has been blocked anyway, but that will still be protected. There are still situations where it's appropriate to have single-sex spaces.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, as a former teacher and mother of two daughters who are teachers, one in primary, one in secondary, there is, as you probably all have heard on the news, a worrying rise in violence in schools, unruly and disruptive behaviour. Really, and that's coming also from the Scottish Government commissioning and starting to report into it. Can I ask what your views are on that, and how do you think that this should be dealt with? How do we tackle this absolute, chaos that's going on these days? And that's all in the backdrop of, cuts to, services and the arising of special needs provision that we need, and all of these things are all, and workload of teachers as well. So I'm just asking what's your views on that, please.
Start with that.
So education is a devolved issue, so it is, rather than, we don't hear talking about Westminster, so it's a devolved issue that I think is, as you're saying, it's going through a review at the moment. I think that the committees are meeting on it in Holyrood just now. I think this is a very difficult subject. I've got a sister who's a teacher who struggles with these kind of things as well. They've all seen a change in attitudes since COVID. Again, I hate to be another person when looking for stuff, but I think there's also been a lack of funding, and we need to put our additional support needs teachers back into our schools and make sure that we're reducing class sizes, increasing the amount of teachers in schools, and that can only come with putting more money in. We can't keep going through taking more and more money out, and that's what's been happening for the last 14 years, and it's happened under the SNP, it's happened under the Tories. So yeah, we need more money going in.
Well, I think part of the problem from my perspective is we ask too much of our teachers. We give them too broad a curriculum, and over the years we've actually asked them to become additional parents. I think teachers, I remember from school, you had a more serious respect. Sometimes you were scared of them, but you definitely had respect for them, and there was a boundary. They weren't another member of your family. They were in a position of authority over you, and they taught you serious stuff you needed to know to progress your life. And I think, unfortunately, we're asking a little bit too much from our teachers. And just when, and like all parties are offering new resources, it's kind of, they can't get the switch off, and they're all dishing out stuff. I think a more broader point I would make is, you know, I've taught for 15 years at different universities, and over that time I've actually worked with students from across the world, because most universities are run full of international students. And quite a worrying broad brush statement I'm going to make, which is the Scottish students, all very good, knowledgeable, diligent, but for some reason low on confidence. And I think maybe that's just my own personal experience, but that's 3 universities over 15 years, and that's been fine. And I just wonder if there's something underlying that we're not giving our pupils the boundaries to feel safe within, and then to grow and respect.
I think there's some irony in that we're all standing to be in the Westminster Parliament, and sometimes when you look at PMQs, the attitude of our leaders is lacking greatly, and I think that plays part of it. When children see how adults sometimes that can impart on them. There's also one of these things where when we look back on our school days or university days, we can sometimes idealise them to where they were. I'm not saying there hasn't been a rise in violence in schools, I think there clearly has been. But what we also have is a rise in the dissemination of that violence through social media, through other forms of media, which we aren't always necessarily aware of. Children are significantly more digitally aware now than we ever were. When I was at school, we were getting taught how to do an email when I was in second year of high school. I don't think anybody is getting taught in the second year of high school to do an email, they're getting taught how to code. And that is the difference. We're talking about a difference of 20 years. That is where we are. So there's a huge online world that isn't being monitored, isn't being tracked, because social media companies are so mismanaged and so unregulated, and children are allowed to foster on there, sometimes very, very positively and sometimes very negatively. And when we're talking about a review by the Scottish Government and by the UK Government and by any other body, these reports need to be taken seriously, because sometimes when we come up to an issue like this, people have a visceral, natural reaction on the subject, and that's quite normal. But evidence-based, properly researched actions a lot of the time need to be taken. But again, I go back to, I think, the impact of social media and the impact of how easy it is to spread that peer pressure of violence on us is, you know, greatly misunderstood. And you know, that's a key area that needs to be tackled.
Okay. Joani?
Yeah, so around, I think, yeah, there has been an increase in violence in schools, and I think that's probably for 2 reasons. Firstly, the crisis in teaching, which I think all of the panel members have touched on, which I think is driven by cuts primarily to local authority budgets. We've seen local budgets cut in support for additional educational needs, but also teacher numbers as a whole. But if you actually look at what drives violence in particular, it's unmet mental health needs, unmet addiction, rising mental illness without the support being put in place, domestic abuse in the home. It's a very complex, it's quite complex reasons why we see increases in violence, and all of these kind of support for mental health and drugs and so on is being cut, primarily because of the cuts to local authority budgets handed down by the Scottish Government, but also by Westminster as well. But when you decimate the community programmes that support people to thrive and to live fulfilling lives and to meet their addiction and their issues, that's what happens. It ends up in a rise in violence. So it is very concerning that we've seen a rise in violence in schools, but it is hardly surprising given the cuts that we've seen to the programmes within communities that we know prevents people from turning to violence.
Yeah, that is a devolved subject, but I'll let it go because I thought it was important to talk about. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. John?
If the polls are to be believed, Labour's on track for a massive landslide, which is a golden opportunity to bring in proportional representation. What would be the argument against doing that?
There wouldn't be one.
Okay, that was a very concise answer. So what's the total view?
On proportional representation?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Greens are very much for proportional representation. The first past the post system is wholly unfair. About 60% of us will vote for a party that doesn't win. That's across the whole country. And that means that our voices aren't being heard. The system that we've got in the Scottish Parliament is better. The Greens would like to see something based more on a European model where they've got like a full proportional representation. But I feel that loses a little bit of that constituency link that we have in the UK, so it definitely needs looked at, but there's no doubt about that.
Okay, Joani?
So I don't know actually what's in the Labour Party manifesto around this, and I should probably double check, but I know that there's reform, and I know that we want to reform the House of Lords. But look, I agree with a more representative system of elections, but I'll tell you what the argument is against it just now, is that I've been out on the doorsteps for well over a year. People are really, really struggling. They're struggling to pay their bills. They're languishing on NHS waiting lists. They're struggling to make ends meet. See, if I told them that I'm going to spend parliamentary time putting through constitutional change around first past the post, they'd look at me as if I was off my head. So that's why I don't think it's a priority at the moment. But I'm not, I kind of wasn't against it, but then you look at Nigel Farage and you worry about what would happen if we had proportional representation at the moment. It would be terrifying. So I'm in two minds about it.
Patrick Harvey.
Or Patrick Harvey, indeed. Patrick Harvey. Yeah.
I understand the allure of that answer, but it's rubbish. We would not have had Boris Johnson's government in 2019 got one of the largest votes in a UK general election, and I think for the past 50 years he still got well below 50%. This country has been governed by parties that have not been able to claim the majority of the vote for generations. It is absurd that we sit in a modern day country and we can't say parties should be able to work together in a uniting system that allows us to trade off ideas, work together, as you were saying, on the climate issues. So when you say it's not a priority, as always with the Labour Party, nothing big is ever a priority. It's always small, incremental change. And when we're talking about big changes that need to happen at a systemic level, the Labour Party always crawls into a hole. When they're in opposition, they come out with these big, grandiose ideas, reforming the House of Lords, introducing proportional representation, and they don't do it. We need to have these things actually happen, and the only way you get that is by people who say all of the things that you talked about, Joani, are a priority, but changing the way our country is governed so we get politicians that we actually deserve, so that our country actually is properly reflected.
One person deserve Patrick Harvey.
Ross,
So, I mean, we've got one of the oldest, most respected democracies in the world, and we change it with...
Not anymore.
We do. So the benefit of the current system is it gives you that regional representation, whereas if you do it kind of across the whole area and go by the percentages, I think you'd probably lose that personal touch. I mean, today you've got 4 people here, all very passionate about this area, and they're all wanting to win election in this defined area. And I think that system's got something for it. I think Grant's made a good point about the whole point of the Parliament is you then go and represent your area and the parties work together, and I'd like to see more of that. And it would work a lot better if we did that. Hopefully we will.
But between you, I mean, before we go back to Johnson, between you, you're all bringing up things that people have said, well, I agree with that. That surely if there's more proportional representation, surely if there's a balanced Parliament where everybody's views are represented more genuinely, then there's an ability to actually work together and bring the best parts of all of it together.
Exactly.
Rather than you know, if we get 40% voting Conservative, 40% voting Labour, and 60% unrepresented.
But I get that point, but then how do you actually identify the actual people?
John, did you want to go back in?
Yeah, sorry, Liz, I just want to bring it back to climate change if I can, and this is a question that's looking for very short answers. I'm not getting a sense of urgency from the panel tonight on climate change. If you look at the chart behind you, you can see that we're on target for 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century, which means many people alive in Strathaven today will have a drastically different life in 75 years' time.
We'll have canoes.
Sorry?
We'll have canoes.
If you are elected to Parliament, what one thing will you immediately say, this is what we have to do right now?
We need to get an extra £500 million invested in the Just Transition Fund.
Hey, Ross?
I think a radical change to our farming, because it covers the vast area of our country, the biggest area of it. If we make a change to that, in principle, that'll make a huge change.
I think we need to reduce the amount of internal flights, and we need to help people improve their houses, and we need to get people into buses instead of in private cars. There's a wealth of things that we need to do, but I did say in my opening speech that we have a limited time to do it.
I just don't accept that there isn't a sense of urgency. The Labour Party's #1 priority is economic growth, and they will deliver that economic growth through investment in green technology. It is at the core of everything that we're going to do, so I just don't accept that.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of the question and answer session. So I think give each candidate a minute to close. Start with that.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone again for coming tonight, and thanks again to Climate Action Strathaven for putting this on. These are the only ones that do it locally. I think it's great. Some of my compatriots in Glasgow are going to several hustings, but we've only got this one. The climate crisis and biodiversity loss are existential crises, and no government has done enough to tackle them. Without a change of direction, we are heading for catastrophe that it is to all measured life. We need leaders that understand the science and are committed to taking the decisive action that we need. I was glad to hear today of the SNP's never-ending ambition, but lack of decisive action, and the green promises of Labour, which seem promising, and I've got my fingers crossed, but it's not going to go far enough. We've got 5 years to turn this around. We need Greens in the room, and you don't need to worry about kicking the Tories out. Sorry, and all the polls are saying that in this area it's going to be a landslide for Labour. Sorry, Granny. So you can use your vote to send that clear message that people and planet are your priorities as well. You can vote green, vote like your future depends on it.
Thank you all, everyone for coming tonight, and thank you in particular to my other panel members, particularly Ross, because we weren't sure if you were going to come or not. So thank you for coming, and thank you to everyone. I think it's clear that I'm not a climate change economist or a climate change expert, but rest assured that I do, and my party takes it very seriously. Please read that Green Prosperity Plan. Email any questions if you've got them. But I mean, this election is really about who you want to represent you and who you want your government to be. We've had 14 years of the Tories, and the political chaos and the economic carnage has been quite astonishing, and we've had 17 years of the SNP who have put ideology before practical solutions, who've put party before country, and put their pals before financial integrity.
True.
So I think we need to vote for change. You might find the Labour Party's manifesto underwhelming, or you might disagree with it completely, but it really is a choice between a Labour government and or the more of the same with the Tories and the SNP. So please have a wee think about voting for Scottish Labour, and I'd appreciate your vote.
Same as the rest of the panel, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for a lively and contentious debate at times, but I think we can all agree we all want to just try to do the best, so thank you very much. And thank you very much for Climate Action Strathaven. Have you found out yet if you've won that award?
Still waiting.
Well, fingers crossed for you winning that award. I was hoping I was going to get to introduce it. Austerity, spending cuts, Brexit, the cost of living crisis, it's made things really difficult for people and families over the last couple of years. But the good news at this election is that the architects, sorry Ross, of the disastrous policies, the Tory party, are going to lose this election. So we get the chance to choose what comes next. We've seen what the Labour Party has to offer. £18 billion worth of cuts, holding the NHS's doors open wide to the private sector, keeping the Tories to a child limit and rape clause, rejecting Europe and embracing the chaos and damage of Brexit. That doesn't sound like change to me. It sounds like a cosy Westminster consensus, and that's not what the SNP stands for. I'm standing to put the people of East Kilbride and Strathaven first, to put Scotland first. If you want change, you can choose a local MP that's embedded in our communities. You can choose to reject Brexit. You can choose to reject Labour and Tory austerity. You can choose to protect our NHS from Westminster privatisation. You can choose to embrace net zero and the opportunities that will follow. And you can choose to deliver proper cost of living support. So vote for the SNP.
Thank you.
Well, I don't really do pre-prepared speeches. It's not the way I roll, as you can see on the notes from tonight. I think it just, it's important that you choose somebody that you want to represent you in Parliament. It's pretty much as simple as that. I don't get up in the morning and want to have a political argument. That's not really what drives me. I'm more interested in the detail, getting things done, and being pragmatic and delivering it. Doesn't float my boat getting involved in the name calling and the mudslinging. So with that in mind, yeah, please vote for me.
Okay, I'd just like to thank Grant, Ross and Joani for the very polite teacher for answering the questions. I'd like to thank all of you for coming along tonight. This couldn't have happened without you. I'd like to thank David and Ian from Avondale Radio who are running the Hustings. Tom and Alison and the team at Climate Action Strathaven for hosting the event.
Why doesn't Ross have a blue table on his microphone?
Well, Avondale Radio has a limited range of songs. But I'd like to thank everybody for coming along and good night. Thank you.
I didn't even thought that well.